Welcome back to the channel. I'm David, aka the Cotswold Photographer, and today I'm going to be comparing the Sony A7 III versus the A7 IV, letting you know whether it's worth spending the money upgrading from the A7 III, or if you're deciding between the two cameras for a first-time purchase, then I'll let you know whether the A7 IV offers that much more for the money. I've had the Sony A7 III since 2018. I'll put a link to my video review on that. And basically I thought it was a really good camera, really good sort of hybrid camera, decent video quality at the time, excellent stills, image quality as well. The A7 IV, when it first came out, I wasn't that impressed with the specs, if I'm honest with you. Kind of looked like a few little upgrades here and there, but I thought it's going to be basically the same camera and just slightly modernized. And so I'm going to go through today all the differences. So you're going to know all the differences between the two models, whether the differences are really sort of significant or not. I'll show image quality samples. I'll show video samples. I've tested the AF and I've recorded screen recordings for you so you can see the AF in action. So if you think that you're going to get value from this video, and if at the end of the video you feel like you have got value, then I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe, because there are going to be tons more videos coming. So anyway, straight onto the video. So we've got the Sony A7 III, which has got this 24 megapixel full frame sensor. It was well known for being sort of a jack of all trades back in the day. And the A7 IV is the long-awaited upgrade, and it now has a 33 megapixel sensor. The resolution, and I'll show you on the screen, the resolution doesn't make much difference. It allows a little bit more cropping, and it gives a little bit more detail, perhaps, you know, when you're looking at sort of the eyelashes of a portrait subject. So I've thrown a few tests together, and I can tell you now that the dynamic range is virtually identical between the two cameras. In this particular image that I shot, I intentionally chose a very, very contrasty scene. So the highlights clipped and the blacks also clipped as well. And what I did in Lightroom, I did no other adjustments apart from I bumped it up by one stop on the exposure. I bumped the blacks and the shadows up by 100, and I pulled the highlights down by 100, and that's the result there. You can see basically there's a lot of information being held in both the blacks and in the shadows and in the highlights as well. The image looks hideous, but it shows the point of just how much you can recover images still on the Sony A7 IV, and it's virtually identical to the A7 III. In terms of high ISO noise performance, you'd expect that an increase in sensor resolution may mean that there's going to be more noise in the images. When you're at about up to ISO 3200, they're identical. I mean, you're talking fractions. So they're identical. When you get to ISO 6400, the A7 III is very, very slightly better. But as soon as you down-res that A7 IV file to the same dimensions as the A7 III, then they're pretty much neck and neck. The A7 IV file down-resed is actually very slightly better, but you're talking tiny, tiny amounts. They're basically the same. So you're getting increased resolution, and it's not coming at the cost of dynamic range or high ISO noise performance. It still really performs well. In terms of image quality, they're basically pretty similar. It's not a reason to upgrade. If you're just thinking, wow, I'll go from the A7 III up to the A7 IV because I get an increase in resolution, it's not worth it. For £700, $700 difference between the two cameras, I don't think it's worth it. But when you throw in, don't go now, that's the image quality. But there are lots of other things that have been upgraded and changed on the A7 IV that may well make you think the upgrade is worth it. And for me, it was certainly these other things that were more interesting. So in terms of handling and ergonomics, we'll just quickly run through the changes. So they've increased the grip size on the A7 IV. It's now a little bit deeper, just feels a little bit more comfortable in the hand. When you look at the weight and also the size specs on paper, you don't think there's much difference. And there isn't in terms of weight. It's about 8 grams heavier with a battery in. But the size difference is very minute as well, but when you actually feel the camera, it feels substantially bigger. The A7 III actually looks and feels quite dinky in comparison. So the A7 IV has got deeper. Okay, so the A7 IV is this one. The A7 IV has got a little bit deeper. That's to accommodate the fully articulating LCD screen, which we'll get onto in a minute. And it's also supposedly has better heat management. so we hopefully won't be getting the overheating problems that have plagued some Sony cameras in the past. The record button has moved, so it's now on the top of the camera, whereas on the A7 III it was on the back of the camera. And we have still a PASM dial. Now we have 3 custom modes on the A7 IV, and we also have a rotating dial beneath the PASM dial that is lockable with a little trigger mechanism here, and it allows you to quickly switch between photo, video, and S&Q mode. So that's pretty nice changes there on the A7 IV, just nice little incremental upgrades that make handling a little bit better. We also have a non-marked exposure compensation dial, or I suppose it's not an exposure compensation dial now because you can map it to anything that you want, and it's a lockable one as well. So that's a nice little feature. It goes straight on to the memory card door, which now has a different locking mechanism. It's a little bit more awkward, actually, because I'm getting used to it. I'm making it look quite easy, but when I first got it, you've got to slide this down and then you've got to pull the door out. The one on the A7 III is just a simple flick and it opens for you. Prefer the one on the A7 III if I'm honest, but again, it's not much in it really, and once you're used to this one, it does work fine. And then we have some increased size on some of the buttons. So the AF on button now is substantially larger. It's easier to find. It feels a lot better actually. It feels better damped as well. The joystick, the AF joystick, has been made larger and slightly flatter to the body, and there's actually more grip on it as well. So that is definitely much better in use. It's much easier just when you're at the camera just to feel which direction you're pushing it in. The one on the A7 III is okay, but it's got a rough edge to it here, which is kind of uncomfortable on your fingers when you're using it for a while. God, I must have soft hands. Perhaps I need to do a bit more manual work. Okay, and so then onto the fully articulating LCD screen. Now, this camera, both the A7 III and the A7 IV, are aimed at hybrid shooters, right? So having a fully articulating LCD screen, I think, is a must, really. The one on the A7 III was one of these sort of flip out, and you could go to about there, which is fine for photography. But I just find that the articulating screen on the A7 IV is much more useful if you want to vlog, even if you're doing like a talking head video like this and you want to be able to frame it, which is what I'm doing on the Canon R5 that I'm filming this on now. The LCD screen on the A7 IV has also been increased in resolution just by a little bit. It's gone from 0.92 million dots to 1.04 million dots. Not a big difference, really, but just a slight upgrade. But more importantly, it's now a 3:2 aspect ratio screen. It's actually matching the sensor, so you're getting more use out of the screen and the real estate on the screen. It also is a touchscreen, just like it was on the A7 III. But the A7 III, really, you only use the touchscreen for autofocus points for the most part. Whereas the one on the A7 IV, it's pretty much like using your iPhone or something like that. You can zoom in on shots by pinching, you can swipe, you can scroll, plus do all sort of selections within the menu. And when you're shooting as well, you can select options on the screen. And plus, of course, do your AF points and everything that you could do on the A7 III before. The EVF in the A7 IV has also been upgraded, so it's gone from 2.36 million dots on the A7 III, which is sort of showing its age a little bit now in 2022, 3 years after it came out. And we've gone up to 3.69 million dots on the A7 IV. And while that's not class leading, it's definitely an improvement, and it's one that you can see when you're looking through the viewfinder. Especially if you're going to manual focus, it just gives you a bit more clarity and a bit more ability to see the fine details when you're manually focusing on perhaps a subject's eyes, if you ever need to, because the AF's so good. But on whatever you're focusing on, it is a little bit better. Everything else on the EVF is pretty much the same, apart from the refresh rate, which can be boosted to 120 Hz on the A7 IV. So for anything fast action, it's going to just keep up a little bit better. The A7 IV, honestly, is the first Sony that I've picked it up and I've thought, and that just works. That works. And now one of the main changes that Sony have implemented in the A7 IV that made me think like that, as well as the ergonomics, is the menu system. And this is a huge change. Normally, a menu system gets upgraded and I just think, oh yeah, all right, great. You know, you've changed a few icons around and just done a few little tweaks. This one is worlds apart from the previous menu. In the older cameras, like the Sony A7 III, I found that I'd be going into menu options and I can't find what I want. I come back out and I'm scrolling. Things aren't in logical places, in logical orders. This one is way better. So you go in and it tells you your sort of your main setting that you're looking to change, so image quality, for example, and then on the right of the screen, it lists all the options that are going to be within that menu system. So it lists the sub-menu options. So you can go onto the menu option, the original one, and it will show you the options that you can change within that menu system. It just makes it so much quicker. It really is much, much better. So the menu system is really quite a big upgrade in my opinion. Now I know it doesn't sound like much, and unless you actually use both of the cameras, you won't appreciate just how good the menu system has become. In fact, it's probably one of the best, and I'm using Canon, Nikon, various different cameras, Fuji and that, and Sony's gone from being probably my least liked menu system, apart from maybe Olympus. And now it's probably one of the best. I'd go as far as to say it probably is the best now, or at least it's right up there with Canon anyway. The ergonomics and the menu system make it much more usable. But where this camera really shines is the autofocus. So the Sony A7 IV now has got 759 phase detect focus points against 693 in the Sony A7 III. They've both got the same amount of contrast detect focus points at 425. You're talking about 93% coverage versus 94% coverage, and you are also talking about being able to focus down to -4 EV rather than -3 EV on the Sony A7 III. The phase detect points also work down to f22 rather than f11, yeah? So all that sounds pretty close. It's like, oh, okay, whatever. But actually, the focusing system pretty much looks like it's been ported over from the Sony A1. They've added real-time tracking in both photo and video. You've got animal eye detect and human, obviously, eye detect in both photo and video. They've got eye detect AF on animal, which works on birds as well, and I have tested this out. So I didn't test it out on too difficult a subject. I tested it out on some geese and some pigeons. It nails it. I mean, once the eyes are pretty much at this sort of angle to the camera, then it's straight on it and it just locks on. So that's really great, really useful for anyone who wants to use it for wildlife, bird, or even sports photography. It does seem to do a really good job of recognizing the subject, locking onto the subject, focusing on the subject, and then tracking it through the frame, wherever it goes through the frame. It's really, really good at that. When I was shooting some portraits, basically the Sony A7 III was always quite good and got better with firmware updates. The IAF on the Sony A7 III is pretty good. It's probably still ahead of something like a Fuji, I would say. But where it had an issue is if the subject was small in the frame, or if they turned away from the frame, so their face is no longer looking at the camera, looking at the lens, or if they ducked out of frame and then came back up, or if they came out of shot and came back in, it just had a little bit of an issue picking up sometimes. And you can see in these videos now that I'm showing you, the A7 III, when the subject ducked out of frame and then came back up into frame, it was still locked on to the little element thing in the background, with a little calendar, I think it is, in the background, and it didn't pick up the face again as she came back into frame. The A7 IV had no problems whatsoever. It picked it up straight away, and I think what they've done is they've changed the algorithm slightly, so I've read, so that the A7 IV is actually trained to look in the same spot where it last saw the face or the eye. And that's enabled it to obviously narrow down its search and focus back in that area. And as soon as the face came back into that area, it was quicker to pick it up. The autofocus is superb. I took it out. I mean, when I first used it, I thought, yeah, this is good. But when I really noticed it, I took it out for a photo shoot not too far from here last week. And it just nailed the autofocus every time on the eye. Every time. It never missed. Whereas the A7 III, yeah, it did a good job, but you could really feel the difference in the speed and the ability of it to stay locked on when the subject was turning, flicking a hair, doing all this stuff. I really noticed the difference. That AF, for me, is the reason to upgrade if you're a portrait shooter or a video shooter, because it works equally well in video as well, and that's a big thing. So the AF, A7 III versus A7 IV, don't get me wrong, the A7 III is still good, but the A7 IV is just taking that upper level. It's taking it up a level to the point where you almost feel like you're cheating. It's like, I can't miss the portrait subject's eyes. I can't miss it. It's doing all the work for you, and that just makes it so easy and reliable to use. So I think for photo, it is worth upgrading to, but it's not going to be mind-blowing differences. If you're looking purely at image quality, is it going to take your images to the next level? Apart from the autofocus sort of meaning that you're going to nail more shots of portraits more often than not, and more often on the 4 versus the 3, in terms of image quality, it's probably not worth upgrading to, and probably not worth spending the money, in my opinion, because the A7 III is already really good. It's 24 megapixels, performs really well. But the video is really where this thing has moved on now. So in the A7 III, everything was 8-bit. You could shoot up to 25 frames per second 4K without a crop. But once you got up to 30 frames per second, they added a crop in there. It was a 1.2 times crop. And that obviously just, meant that it wasn't quite as flexible. Also, if you want to do a lot of grading in post, you want to push those video files around a little bit, then being 8-bit, it's going to be more hard to do. So the A7 IV now has added 4K 60. That's with a 1.5 times crop, and I'll show you some video samples now so that you can get an idea of the crops that are going to be introduced with various modes. And it also does 4K 30 with up to 4K 30 with no crop. And there's a whole bunch of different bit rates and color depths and stuff like that you can use. It's 10-bit internal and it's 422 footage. Gives you a lot more ability to color grade it in post and to push the file around a little bit as you want to without it degrading or causing image quality problems. So pretty big file sizes. One thing to be aware of is that you're going to need fast cards. So the memory cards in here, you can now use UHS 2 in both memory slots. Memory card slot 1 also accepts CF Express Type A cards. I don't have one of them, but you're going to need a V90 rated card to be able to use those higher video levels. So it won't even allow me to try and record all intra or H.265, which is also available in this. It won't even allow me to try and record those on something like a SanDisk 170 megabytes a second Extreme Pro card, so a UHS 1 card. So it's not like it even tries and then sort of cuts out halfway through the video. It won't even let you do it. It just tells you, flashes up a warning, says you need a V90 card for this one, or on some of the middle sort of resolution bit rates, it's gonna say you need a V60 card. So I actually bought some memory cards specifically for this because I didn't have any SD cards that were fast enough and that had a big enough capacity. I'll link to those in the description down below. They work with all the video modes up to 4K 60 all intra. So the video footage is a lot more flexible. So it's a lot better, as I say, for hybrid shooters, especially if you're going to do more post-processing. There's also S-Cinetone color profile on this now. So if you don't want to use a log, but you want to use an HLG type profile, you can go straight into S-Cinetone, and that gives quite nice footage straight out of camera. And we've also got obviously all the S-Log options. Slog, we've got all the S-Log options as well. The autofocus in video is superb. It picks up everything pretty much straight away. It works just as well as in the photo modes. The A7 IV, Sony are claiming 5.5 stops of in-body image stabilization against 5 stops in the A7 III. Honestly, not a lot of difference. I can't see the difference. And again, you can see the video from the video footage that I'm showing you. The footage is okay. It's fairly well stabilized, but Sony's IBIS is probably not amongst the best out of all the different cameras, out of all the different ones available. I'd sort of put Canon's way above Sony's. But what Sony does give you now is this active stabilization. Basically, it's a digital crop using the information from the gyro on the IBIS. And it's going to digitally crop in a little bit on your image, but it's going to level out the image, make it a little bit smoother. And again, I'll show you examples of that now. So I'm just going to test out the IBIS on this. So this is completely no IBIS at all. IBIS is turned off. So this is how it looks. And then we'll quickly change in a second. So now I've got standard IBIS on. And again, I'll give you a quick spin, see how it looks. fairly smooth. It's a bit of shape though. And then I'll try it again with the active IBIS, which will crop in a little bit on the image, so that's at my full reach, so you'll be able to see how much it crops in. Okay, and then this is with the active IBIS on, so there should be a little bit of a crop. On the Sigma 24-70 f2.8 at 24mm here, so I'll give you an idea of the angle of view if you're vlogging. Oh, okay, hopefully that's looking a bit smoother than without. So there is a little bit of a crop on there on the 4K video, but it's not too much. At arm's length I can still get far enough away to get a decent-ish look and to vlog if I wanted to, and if you put it on a little gorilla pod or something, you'd be even further away. So I don't know whether it'll work for you, but hopefully this helps a little bit. Okay, back to the next section. With that 24-70 Sigma lens I was using at 24mm, it's still wide enough to be able to vlog if you wanted to vlog. Obviously, if you put it on something like a gorilla pod, then it would definitely give you the width to be able to vlog, and it does look nice and smooth. And obviously with the focusing being so good, you can vlog and not worry about your focus settings. And also on the S&Q mode now, it uses a decent bit rate, so you're not losing quality on that, and it's 10-bit as well, and you've got various options here, I'll even tell you now. So it's 140 megabits a second, and it's 422 10-bit, and there are options to drop that down to 8-bit if you want. But you do have the option of 10-bit on the S&Q mode, which you definitely didn't have in the previous A7 III. In fact, the A7 III S&Q mode, the bit rate was pretty low, I think, so the quality wasn't that great. There's also a couple of other options that they've added in video. And now you have the ability to control focus transitions and how fast it transitions from one point to the next, and you've got 7 steps on that. There's also an interesting little thing that they've done, which I've seen on a DJI video camera that just came out recently, and it's focus mapping. So what they do is they give you the option to put focus mapping on, and it's going to show you by color, blue and red, what's in focus, with the given depth of field that you've got using the aperture that you're using, and what's out of focus. I don't particularly like it, but I can see it's a useful feature. This video's been pretty long, pretty comprehensive. I hope you found it useful. I hope you got some value out of it. I hope it helped with your decision making. And if it did, then please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, because there's going to be a lot more content like this coming soon.